The Han River wore fog like a mourning veil that November night, and Amara Whitfield stood at the edge of the Bampo Bridge with paint still wet on her fingertips and a folded envelope pressed against her ribs. Below her, the water moved slow and black, indifferent to the woman in the oversized denim jacket, who was trying to decide whether the last 3 years of her life had been a love story or a hostage negotiation. Behind her, 12 black SUVs blocked both directions of traffic. Their headlights cut through the mist like accusations. Men in charcoal suits stood in a perfect crescent, hands folded at their waists, faces blank as porcelain. And at the center of that crescent, walking toward her with the slow, deliberate patience of a man who had never once in his life been late, was Seojun Rhee. He wore no coat, just a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, exposing the black ink that traveled up his forearms like a language she had spent 3 years learning to read. Blood, not his, freckled the collar. His left knuckle was split, and in his right hand, he carried the small canvas she had thrown at his chest 4 hours earlier, when she screamed at him in a language of hers he did not speak, but somehow, always, understood. "Amara, ya," he said, and the tenderness in his voice was the most dangerous thing she had ever heard. "Come away from the railing, please." She turned. Mascara ran down her cheeks in 2 dark rivers. In her free hand, she held her phone, thumb hovering over a number that would end everything, for both of them. "Tell me who you really are, Seojun," she whispered. "Tell me before I have to guess with the police." But to understand how Amara ended up on that bridge, with a Mafia boss begging her to live, and a confession burning a hole through her jacket pocket, we need to go back. All the way back to a bus stop in Chicago, and a girl who believed that love meant making herself smaller. This story is for every woman who has ever painted the world in colors nobody paid her for. Every woman who has been told her dreams were too loud, her skin too much, her ambition an inconvenience to men who claimed to love her. Every woman who mistook control for care, silence for safety, and staying for strength. If you have ever wondered whether you could walk into a room full of powerful people and refuse to shrink, this one is for you. If you have ever loved someone who terrified you in ways you could not name, stay with me. Because Amara Whitfield's story is not about being rescued by a dangerous man. It is about becoming a woman so certain of her own worth that even the most dangerous man in Seoul had to choose between his empire and her freedom. Before we go further, hit that subscribe button and drop a single word in the comments. Stay, just so I know you are riding with her. Let's begin. Amara Whitfield grew up on the 2nd floor of a walk-up on 63rd Street, above a barbershop that played Anita Baker every Sunday, and a corner store whose owner, Mr. Kwan, slipped her hot dog pastries whenever her mother worked doubles at the hospital. Her father had left when she was 7, leaving behind a set of oil pastels, a wool cap, and a debt her mother Renata refused to talk about. Amara learned early that a woman could be beautiful and tired at the same time. She learned that art supplies were expensive and light bills were not optional. She learned to want quietly. By 19, she was painting murals on the side of laundromats in South Shore for $200 and a hot meal. By 23, her work hung in a small gallery in Pilsen, and a Korean tourist named Ha-eun bought a piece for $1,500 and told her, in careful English, that in Seoul there was a whole neighborhood, Ikseondong, where artists like her could rent studios for the price of a Chicago parking spot. Amara wrote the name on the back of a receipt and kept it in her wallet for 4 years. The reason it took her 4 years was named Darius Falks. He was a music producer with a smile like a promise, and a bank account he never explained. He met her at a rooftop show in Wicker Park when she was 24, and by 25 she was living in his condo in the South Loop, painting less, apologizing more, and covering the utility bill on a place he told everyone he owned outright. Darius did not hit her. That was the sentence she used to explain to her cousin Trevon why she stayed. He does not hit me. As though the absence of one particular violence was a foundation on which a life could be built. What Darius did instead was smaller and slower. He rearranged her studio to make room for his equipment. He told her the piece she was proudest of, a 9-foot portrait of her grandmother Ozella, looked cluttered. He introduced her at parties as my girl who dabbles in art. Dabbles. As though her hands had not been stained with cadmium red since she was 6 years old. The lie she believed was this, that love was the ability to survive being made smaller, that if she just softened the corners of herself, if she just proved she was low maintenance, if she just waited, Darius would remember the woman he had met on the rooftop and choose her back. Then Ozella died. 91 years old, in a nursing home in Bronzeville, holding a rosary and a picture of Amara's mural. At the funeral, Darius checked his phone during the eulogy. That night, when Amara was still in her black dress crying at the kitchen counter, he told her that maybe she needed to get on antidepressants because her sadness was a lot to be around. She stopped crying mid-sob. She stared at him. And in that silence, Ozella's voice moved through her chest like a warm hand. "Baby, you were not born to be somebody's inconvenience." 3 weeks later, Amara sold every piece of art she owned that would fit in a shipping crate. She emptied a savings account Darius did not know existed, one her mother had made her open at 16, $11,400. She booked a one-way flight to Incheon. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "Only, I am not dabbling anymore." She did not tell Darius where she was going. She told her mother and Renata, who had spent 30 years being small for men who did not deserve her, whispered into the phone, "Fly, baby. Fly and do not look back." Amara arrived in Seoul on a Tuesday in March, dragging 2 suitcases and a portfolio through the rain. She had a 2-week Airbnb, a studio lead, and a phone number Ha-Yun had given her 4 years ago. What she did not have, what she could not have known she was walking toward, was Seojun Rhee. And Seojun Rhee was already looking for her. The studio in Ixindong was 340 square feet of concrete floor, 1 high window, and a smell of turpentine and old wood that made Amara cry the first time she locked the door behind her. She paid 6 months up front. She bought a mattress from a Daiso down the block. She painted for 11 hours a day. Within 2 months, her work was hanging in a small collective show near Hongdae, and a Korean art blog wrote a piece calling her palette "Grief That Has Learned to Sing." That was the piece Seojun Rhee read at 4 in the morning, in the back of a black Genesis sedan, on a phone that had no name attached to it. She met him 3 days later, not in a gallery, in a ramen shop. Amara was eating alone on a Thursday night at a 12-seat counter in Yuljiro, chopsticks in one hand, sketchbook in the other, when a man sat down 2 stools away and ordered in a voice so quiet the cook had to lean forward. He wore a slate gray overcoat with the collar up and no jewelry except a thin silver ring on his right thumb. His hair was cut short and slightly silver at the temples, though he could not have been older than 35. He did not look at her. He looked at her sketchbook. "You draw the light like it hurts you," he said in English so precise it sounded translated. "That is unusual." Amara turned to face him, ready to be irritated. Instead, she found herself looking into the calmest eyes she had ever seen. Not warm, not cold, just still, the way a lake is still at 4 in the morning before anyone gets in it. "That's because it does," she said before she could stop herself. He nodded once, as though she had confirmed something he had suspected. Then he paid for both their meals and stood up to leave. At the door, he turned back. "I would like to commission a piece. My office is on the 42nd floor of the Rhee building in Gangnam. If you are interested, come Monday at 10. He placed a black business card on the counter. There was no name on it, only a phone number and a single Korean character, Jia, home. "I don't take commissions from strangers," Amara said. "I know," he answered. "That is why I asked." Then he was gone, and the cook, whose name was Mrs. Bay and who had fed Amara at least once a week for a month, leaned across the counter with her eyes wide. "Do you know who that was?" she whispered. "He didn't say." "Good," Mrs. Bay said, and would not say another word about him. Amara went back to her studio that night and could not sleep. She Googled the Rhee building. It was 53 stories of black glass on Tehran Row, and it was owned by Rhee Global Holdings, a company whose Wikipedia page was 3 paragraphs long, and whose CEO's photograph had, mysteriously, no face attached to the caption. Every article referred to him only as Rhee Seojun, private. On Monday at 10, she went. She told herself she was going for the commission fee. She told herself she was going because she was curious. She told herself a lot of things. She rode the elevator up 42 floors with her sketchbook clutched against her chest, and when the doors opened, Seojun Rhee was standing there in a charcoal suit with a small canvas already prepared, waiting for her. He bowed slightly. "Amara Whitfield," he said. "Thank you for coming. Before we begin, I need to tell you something honestly. I did not find you by accident." Her stomach turned over. "I have been watching your work for 6 months," he continued. "And I need you to understand that any commission you take from me will change your life. Some of it in ways you will love, some of it in ways you will not. If you want to leave, this elevator will take you down, and no one will ever contact you again." Amara did not step into the elevator. She stepped into the room. The office was not an office. It was a library the size of a basketball court, with floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides and books in 7 languages on the 4th. There was no desk, only a long walnut table, a leather chair, and, at the far end, a painting by Kehinde Wiley that Amara had only ever seen in a museum catalog. Seojun poured her tea himself, genmaicha, in a small ceramic cup that felt older than her grandmother. For 6 weeks she went to that room twice a week. She painted his mother from a photograph he kept in a drawer. She painted the mountains outside Gyeongju, where he had spent summers as a child. She painted his hands, at his request, because he said they were the part of him he understood the least. He paid her in cash, in envelopes so thick she stopped counting after the 3rd one. She used the money to send her mother a plane ticket to Seoul, first class, and to open a real bank account in her own name, in a currency she was learning to spell. He never touched her. He asked before he handed her the tea. He listened when she talked about Ozella, about the barbershop, about the color of Chicago light in October, in a way Darius never had in 3 years. And slowly, in the way that things happen when you are not paying attention, Amara realized she was falling in love with a man whose last name she did not fully understand. The revelation came on a Tuesday. She was leaving the Rhee building at 8 in the evening when a woman stepped out from behind a pillar in the parking garage. She was Korean-American, mid-30s, in a black trench coat and sensible boots, with an ID clipped to her belt. She flashed it fast. Interpol, Financial Crimes Division. Her name was Agent Yuna Cho. "Ms. Whitfield," she said, "I need 3 minutes of your time. In that car. Now." Amara got in the car because she was already afraid of the answer. Agent Cho did not soften it. Seojun Rhee, she said, was the 3rd-generation head of the Rhee-pa, one of the oldest and most restructured organized crime families in South Korea. His grandfather had run guns during the Korean War. His father had laundered money through shipping containers in Busan for 40 years. Seojun himself had inherited the organization at 29, after his father's stroke, and had spent the last 6 years attempting to move the family's holdings into legitimate real estate, tech, and hospitality. He was, in Agent Cho's words, the cleanest dirty man in Northeast Asia. "But he is still dirty, Miss Whitfield," she said. "And the Japanese syndicate he is currently in a cold war with does not care how many art commissions he throws around. They have a photograph of you leaving his building. They believe you are his partner, not his artist, his partner. And in that world, a partner is a leverage point." Amara's hands were shaking. She could not tell if it was from fear or fury. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I am not going to arrest him this month," Agent Cho said. "I am going to arrest him next year, at the earliest, with a case that will actually stick. Until then, you are a civilian in a crosshair. You have 3 options. You can run. You can stay and pretend you do not know. Or you can help me protect yourself, on your terms." She slid a card across the seat. "But, Miss Whitfield," she added quietly, "before you decide, you should ask him. Because if he is the man I think he is becoming, he already knows I am talking to you right now. And he has been waiting for you to know the truth so he could stop lying by omission." Amara stepped out of the car onto the wet pavement of Gangnam, and every streetlight suddenly felt like a spotlight. She looked up at the 42nd floor of the black glass tower. A single light was still on. She did not go home. She went back up. Seojun was standing at the window when she opened the door, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. He did not turn. "Agent Cho is thorough," he said. "I hope she was also kind." "You knew." "I have known since the day I invited you to Monday. I told you that day that any commission would change your life. I did not tell you why. That was a cowardice." He turned then, and for the first time in 6 weeks he looked tired. Not the polished tiredness of a man who ran an empire, the bone tiredness of a man who had been rehearsing a difficult sentence. "I am sorry, Amara. You deserved the truth before you deserved my tea." She sat down in the leather chair because her legs would not hold her. "Are you what she says you are?" "I am the head of a family whose money was made in ways I did not choose and cannot fully undo. I have not, personally, ordered a violent act in 3 years. I am dismantling what my father built and rebuilding it as something my daughter, if I ever have one, could inherit without shame. But dismantling is slow, and there are men in Osaka and Vladivostok who would prefer I fail. And I am a leverage point. You are a woman I love," he said, "who has become, because of my failure to disappear from your life fast enough, also a leverage point. Those two facts are not the same, but they are living in the same body, and you get to decide what to do with both." Amara stared at him. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of tea and questions, and the way he asked her about Ozella. She had known. Some part of her, the part that had learned in Chicago how a man's kindness could be a room with locks, had known. She had walked in anyway, because for the first time in her adult life, someone had looked at her sketchbook before he had looked at her mouth. "I am not running," she said. He closed his eyes for a moment, and she saw the muscle in his jaw work. "Amara, I am not running, and I am not pretending. I am also not becoming a woman who lives in your world on your terms. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to give me the name of your best lawyer, the one who does not work for you, who works for people like me who accidentally end up standing next to people like you. You are going to pay for a security consultant of my choosing, chosen by Agent Cho, not by you. You are going to sign a document I am going to have drawn up that says, if anything happens to me, half of your legitimate real estate holdings transfer to a foundation in my mother's name that funds Black women artists studying abroad. And you are going to keep your hands off my career. My gallery show in May happens because of my work, not because you bought the building." She was shaking, but she was not crying. "Those are my terms, Seojun, not because I do not love you, because I do. And I have already spent one relationship being made smaller by a man who told me he loved me. I would rather lose you standing up than keep you on my knees." He walked to the walnut table. He opened a drawer. He took out a black fountain pen and a piece of thick cream paper. He wrote 3 names, 3 phone numbers, and a single sentence at the bottom. Then he signed his full name and slid the paper across the table. "The lawyer is Han Ji-woo. She hates me. She will love you. The consultant is a woman named Bo-ram, formerly of the National Police Agency. Agent Cho already knows her. The foundation. I will have the documents drafted this week. My hands will stay off your career, though I reserve the right to sit in the back row of your gallery show and cry." Amara let out a laugh that was mostly a sob. "One more thing," she said. "If you ever, in any way, lie to me by omission again, I am gone. I do not care what you feel for me. I do not care what I feel for you. I will walk out of Seoul and you will not find me. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Say it back to me. If I lie to you by omission again, you will leave, and I will not deserve to find you." She picked up the paper. She folded it. She put it in her jacket pocket. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Rhee." The next 6 weeks were the most terrifying of Amara's life, and they were also the 6 weeks during which she stopped, in any part of herself, being small. Han Ji-woo turned out to be a 52-year-old woman with a silver bob, and a habit of arriving to meetings 10 minutes early. She spent their first session laying out, on a conference table in her office in Jongno, exactly how a foreign national in Amara's position could be protected, exposed, or destroyed. She did not soften anything. "You are dating a man who is going to be indicted within 18 months, Ji-woo said. Not because he is guilty of what he is doing now, because he is guilty of what his family did for 50 years, and the statute of limitations has not closed on all of it. If you stay, you will be deposed, possibly more than once. You will need to answer honestly. You will need to have nothing to hide, which means you will need to build a life in Seoul that is completely independent of him, financially, professionally, socially. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes." "Good. Then let us begin." They filed paperwork for a formal artist's visa, independent of any sponsorship from Rhee Global. They incorporated a small LLC in Amara's name. They opened a business bank account. Boram, the security consultant, moved into the studio next door to Amara's, ostensibly as a tenant, and taught Amara 3 things: how to spot a tail, how to change her patterns, and how to fire a small handgun in a licensed range in Gyeonggi. Not because she would ever carry one, but because Boram believed that a woman who understood the weight of a weapon was harder to intimidate. The pushback came from 3 directions. First, from a Japanese man in a beige suit who approached her outside a coffee shop in Anguk and, in flawless English, offered her $100,000 to walk away from Seojun and give a single recorded interview about him. She smiled at him. She said, "I don't take commissions from strangers." She walked away. She reported it to Boram within 11 minutes. He did not approach her again. Second, from Seojun's own second-in-command, a man named Doyun, who was 50, and did not like the idea of a black American woman having leverage over his boss. He tried to have her Airbnb owner evict her. It did not work, because she no longer lived in the Airbnb, and because Ji-woo had already had a private conversation with him that included the phrase labor board. Third, and hardest, from her own mother. Renata flew into Incheon in mid-April, exhausted from the 14-hour flight, and Amara did not lie to her. She sat her mother down in the studio, poured her a glass of Chardonnay, and told her every single thing. About Darius, about Seojun, about the Rhee-pa, about Agent Cho, about the paperwork and the foundation and the shooting range. Her mother listened without interrupting. When Amara finished, Renata took a long sip of her wine and said, "Baby, do you remember what I said when you left Chicago?" "Fly." "That is what I said. And I did not put a condition on it. I did not say fly only if the sky is safe. I said fly. If this man is what you say he is becoming, and if you have built the fences you say you have built, then you are not my little girl anymore. You are a grown woman making a grown woman's choice with her eyes open. And I am going to spend the next 2 weeks eating Korean barbecue and telling every stranger in Seoul that my daughter is a working artist." Amara cried into her mother's shoulder for a long time. "Before we go on, if this story is landing on something in your chest, do me a favor and share it with one woman in your life who is trying to figure out whether she is allowed to want a big life. Just one. She is out there, and she needs to hear it." Amara's gallery show opened on May 17th at a converted textile warehouse in Seongsu-dong, and she paid for the space herself, out of her own account, with money she had earned from 3 commissions that had nothing to do with Seojun Rhee. The show was called Ozella, after her grandmother. There were 21 pieces. She priced them, on Ji-woo's advice, at exactly what she believed they were worth, and not one lower. 200 people came. She had invited them all, personally, from a list she had built over her 14 months in Seoul. There were other artists. There was Mrs. Bae from the ramen shop. There was Ha-yoon, the woman who had bought her first Korean-sold piece 4 years earlier in Chicago. There was Renata, in a green silk dress, holding court by the door. There was Agent Cho in plain clothes, because Amara had decided that transparency was the only way she was going to survive this. And there was Seojun, in the back row, in a black suit, watching her from a distance he had promised to keep and was, visibly, straining to keep. Halfway through the evening, Darius Fulks walked in. He had flown to Seoul. He had used a +1 from a music industry contact. He wore a jacket she had bought him for his birthday 3 years earlier, and he had, apparently, been drinking on the plane. He walked up to her in the middle of a conversation with a Korean art critic and put his hand on the small of her back like he still owned the geography of her body. "Amara, baby, we need to talk." She turned, slowly. She looked at his hand on her back. She looked at his face. And she did something she had never in 3 years done in his presence. She did not shrink. "Take your hand off me, Darius. Now." He blinked. He laughed the small, confused laugh of a man who had never once been told no by her. "Baby, come on." "You flew 9,000 miles to a show you would have called cluttered 6 months ago. You are drunk. You are wearing a jacket I paid for. And you are standing in a room full of people who came here because they respect my work. You are not one of them. You are going to walk out that door right now, and you are going to fly home. And if you ever try to insert yourself into my life again, my lawyer, whose name is Han-ji Woo, will spend a very interesting 6 months of her life on you. Do you understand?" The room had gone quiet. She had not raised her voice. Darius's mouth opened. It closed. He looked, for the first time in the years she had known him, small. He looked at the room. He looked at her mother, who was watching him the way a lioness watches a limping thing. He looked at Seojun in the back, who had risen very slowly to his feet, hands loose at his sides, and whose expression was so neutral it was, in that moment, more terrifying than a raised fist. Darius left. The Korean art critic, whose name was Mr. Young, cleared his throat and said, in Korean, "Ms. Whitfield, would you like to continue our conversation?" "Yes," Amara said in Korean she had been practicing for a year. "I would like that very much." She sold 17 of the 21 pieces that night. She earned in a single evening more than Darius Folks had ever given her permission to want. 2 weeks after the show, Darius called her, not to apologize. He called her from a Chicago area code at 3 a.m. Seoul time, and she answered because she wanted him to know she was not afraid to. He was crying. He told her he had lost his condo. He told her his mother was sick. He told her he had made a mistake, and that if she would just come home, he would do anything. He would go to therapy. He would come to her shows. He would carry her canvases. He said the words, "I love you" more times in 11 minutes than he had said them in 3 years. Amara sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and listened. She let him talk. She let him say all of it. And when he was done, she said something Ozella had said to her once, when she was 17 and crying over a boy who had lied to her about a prom dress. "Darius, a man does not remember he loves you when you are on the roof of a warehouse in Seoul selling out a show. He remembers he needs you. Those are not the same thing. And I am not a resource anymore. I am a person. Amara, please. I hope your mother gets well. I mean that. I'm going to hang up now, and I am going to block this number. Not because I hate you, because I have finally figured out that I do not have to keep the door open just because you are the one knocking." She hung up. She blocked the number. She sat in the dark for a long time. And then, because she was a grown woman who understood that emotional labor was not a substitute for real support, she called her therapist, a Korean-American woman in Itaewon named Dr. Song, whom she had been seeing weekly for 4 months, and she left a voicemail asking to move her session to the next morning. Then she did something she had not done in 14 months. She sat on the floor of her studio with a small canvas and a single brush, and she painted, not for a commission, not for a show, not for a man, but for herself. A self-portrait, not of her face, of her hands, her working hands, cadmium red under the nails, the small scar on the left knuckle from a broken bottle in the alley behind the barber shop on 63rd Street when she was 9 years old, the callus on the right thumb from 20 years of holding brushes, the hands that had carried her here. When she was done, she wept. Not the way she had wept in Darius's kitchen, the way a woman weeps when she is finally, at 28 years old, met herself. Then she went to bed, and she slept the sleep of a woman who was no longer running. In September, 7 months after she had landed in Incheon with 2 suitcases, Amara received an email from the Liam Museum of Art. They wanted to include 3 of her pieces in a group show titled Diaspora and Home, opening in November. The curator, a Korean woman named Ms. Park, who had never met Seojun Rhee and did not know his name, had seen the Ozella show and had, in her email, used the phrase, "a voice we have been waiting for." Amara read the email 3 times. Then she called her mother. Then she called Jiwoo, because she had learned that good news, like bad news, deserved a lawyer. Then she sat on the floor of her studio and let herself feel it. The Liam was one of the most important private museums in Asia. It was not a stepping stone. It was a threshold. And she had crossed it alone. She signed the contract in October. The fee was substantial. She used part of it to pay off the last of her mother's credit card debt, wired directly to Renata's bank in Chicago, with a note that said, "From your grown daughter, with interest." She used part of it to fund the first 2 scholarships of the Amara Whitfield Foundation, which had, in the end, been founded with her own money, not Seojun's, because she had decided that the paperwork with him would be a contingency, not a beginning. She used part of it to buy herself a small apartment in Ikseondong, 3 blocks from her studio, with a real bed and a working kitchen and a window that faced east. The apartment was in her name, only her name. She signed the deed on a Wednesday afternoon in a small office off Insadong-gil, and the notary, an older Korean woman with kind eyes, looked at her over her glasses and said in careful English, "Congratulations, Ms. Whitfield. You are a woman of property." Amara laughed, and it startled her. She had not laughed like that in years. That night, she walked home through the narrow lanes of Ikseondong, past the hanoks with their curved tile roofs, past the tea houses spilling warm light onto the wet stone, past a busker playing a gayagum on the corner near her studio. She stopped. She listened. She put a 5,001 note in his case, not because she needed to prove anything to anyone, but because the music was beautiful and she could afford to be generous. She was, she realized, a woman who could afford to be generous, not with money, with herself. She had come to Seoul with $11,400 and a note that said, "I am not dabbling anymore." 7 months later, she was a working artist with a museum show, a paid-off mother, a foundation in her grandmother's name, and an apartment she had bought with her own hands. She had not been rescued. She had built it. Seojun came to her new apartment for the first time in late October. She invited him. He arrived at 7, in a gray sweater and jeans, with a bottle of Maggioli and a small wrapped gift. It was, she saw when she opened it, a first edition of a Toni Morrison novel he had heard her mention, once, in June. They had not been alone together, in a private space, since the night she had listed her terms in his office. They had seen each other in public for supervised dinners. They had spoken on the phone. They had, in the presence of Jiwoo, signed the paperwork for the contingency foundation. They had been, for 6 months, 2 adults conducting a courtship under conditions of extraordinary transparency. She cooked him kimchi jjigae, which she had learned from Mrs. Bay. He complimented it without exaggeration. He asked quietly about the Liam show. She told him. He listened. He did not offer to buy anything. He did not offer to know anyone. He listened the way a man listens when he has finally understood that the woman in front of him is not a project. After dinner, she poured them each a small glass of Maggioli, and she sat across from him at her small wooden table, and she said the things she had been rehearsing for a month. "Seojun, I love you. I have loved you since the ramen shop. I want you to know that. But I need you to also know that my life is no longer contingent on you. If you go to prison next year, or the year after, or 5 years from now, I will visit you. I will not marry you until you are free, if you are ever free, because I refuse to be a woman who marries a man she cannot fully choose. And if the dismantling you promised me is not real, if you are lying to yourself about who you are becoming, I will know, and I will leave, not with drama, with paperwork." He was quiet for a long time. He turned the small glass in his hand. "Amara," he said, "I have spent 6 months watching you build a life that does not need me. It has been the most humbling experience of my adult life. And it is also the only reason I still believe I can become a man worthy of standing next to you. So here is what I will offer, not as a promise, because promises from men like me are worth less than the paper they are written on, but as a plan. In 18 months, I will have fully divested from 3 of the 4 remaining unclean revenue streams. In 3 years, the 4th. I have already begun cooperating quietly with Agent Cho, on terms that do not involve my father's name. I do not know if I will avoid prison. I know that I would rather spend a decade in a cell knowing you are painting in Ikseondong than a lifetime free knowing I made you small. She reached across the table. She took his hand. It was the first time she had touched him, deliberately, in 6 months. His hand was warm and it was shaking, very slightly. "Then we are courting," she said. "Slowly, on the record, with witnesses. And when you are free, if you are free, we will see what we still are to each other." "Yes," he said, "we will see." They did not kiss that night. They finished the magoli. He went home in a car she called for him, from a company Jiwoo had approved, and Amara went to bed in her own apartment, in her own name, in a city she had chosen, and she slept. That night, on the Bampo Bridge, 4 hours after Amara had thrown a small canvas at Seojun's chest, was not the end of the story. It was, it turned out, a misunderstanding. Amara had discovered a document in her lawyer's office that she believed proved Seojun had lied to her about a shell company. She had confronted him. She had walked out. She had gone to the bridge, not to jump, but because the bridge was the place in Seoul she went when she needed to think, and she had, in her fury, texted him from it. And Seojun, being Seojun, had assumed the worst. The document, as it turned out, had been from 2019, before her, before the promise, before the dismantling. Jiwoo confirmed it by 7 the next morning. But the fight was real, and the boundary Amara held, that any lie by omission would end them, was real. She made him prove it. She made him bring every document. She made him sit in Jiwoo's office for 6 hours, and when she was satisfied, she did not apologize for the bridge. She said only, "Now you know I meant it." He said, "I have always known you meant it. That is why I love you." 3 years later, Amara Whitfield had a permanent exhibition space in Ikseondong, a second gallery show at the Liam, 22 scholarship recipients at the Ozella Whitfield Foundation, and a mother who lived 6 months a year in a small apartment 2 blocks from her own. Seojun Rhee was, at that point, awaiting the final ruling in a plea agreement that would cost him 7 years and half his wealth. She visited him every Sunday. She painted through the week. She did not get a fairy tale ending. She got something better. She got herself back. If this story reached you, if any part of it felt like a mirror, do 3 things for me. Drop a comment and tell me the one boundary you are finally ready to hold. Share this with the woman in your life who is standing at her own bridge, trying to decide whether love is supposed to feel like this. And subscribe, because next week I am telling you the story of a Filipina nurse in Milan who discovered that the man asking her to marry him was already someone's husband, and what she did next changed 3 countries. Amara Whitfield stopped dabbling. So can you. Fly, and do not look back.